Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. Talent Finders would like to welcome highly accomplished leadership author and speaker, Leanne Meyer. So, welcome, Leanne.
Thanks, Karen. I'm excited to be here.
So, firstly, I would like to congratulate you on all your achievements. So, can you share with us how your career started?
Thank you. Thanks, Karen. It's funny when I think about how my career started, I don't think of an actual job. I
Yes.
think it was finding more a field of study that I loved. And I remember being at college and I studied industrial psychology, but that was not what I'd chosen to do. It was supposed to have just been a required subject. And I just remember sitting in my first class and loving it, just feeling that moment when you're like, oh, this is what I want to spend my life focusing on. And it was really the focus of, how do we focus and help people thrive at work? And so I loved it. So I think my career probably started with that first class, just realizing this was an area of field of study that I loved and wanted to immerse myself in. So that's probably where it started.
Amazing. So, your passion is focused around leadership. You currently direct at Carnegie Mellon, which is Women's Executive Leadership Academy, and are
Mhm.
the former director of the university's Accelerate Leadership Center. So, can you share with us more about this and why now more than ever it's such a strong need and focus for women in leadership?
Sure. So at the business school at the university, and our focus very much is on providing our students, our graduate students, MBA students, with the leadership, interpersonal, and communication skills that we know accelerate a career once they're in workplaces. So that's what I did in the Accelerate Leadership Center. And now I've moved to the Women's Leadership Academy because my interest, and this, when you ask why it's important. If we think about what the pandemic has done to women who work, in a recent
Yes.
study, we're seeing that 1 in 4 women are considering downshifting their careers, and especially at the height of the pandemic. It's changed since then, but it was an overwhelming time for women. And I was concerned that I think we're losing a lot of the gains that we'd made for women in workplaces. And so women in leadership, I think it's an important focus now. And that's why I was very interested in our Women's Leadership Academy, because
Yes.
this academy focuses on helping women who work, not just our students. And so my interest at the moment is in that sphere, and especially given, I think, the after effects of the pandemic, when we know many women reevaluated their careers and many women stepped away from what were very successful careers. And so I think we want to make sure we don't lose everything that many women have worked for before us. And so I think that's why it's important now.
Yes. So you're also the author of your new book called Climbing the Spiral Staircase. So can you share with us more about the book and what was the inspiration and motivation for writing the book?
Yeah. Thanks, Karen. I think it goes back to what I was saying previously. I think our students are very blessed to be able to get access to the learning they do on campus. And my concern was that there are a lot of women who are not in these positions to get this kind of information. And so I wanted to make what we teach women and the people who want to be their allies, I wanted to get the message out more broadly, and a book was the easiest way to do that. And so the
Yes.
book is specifically focused on women, and it's really helping women, I think, first of all, understand that workplaces are still very gendered environments,
Oh,
helping
very
them
much so.
helping them understand what specific obstacles they may navigate because of their gender, and how to effectively do that. And then to give some strategies for the different shifts that I think women need to make over a career, sort of map out 3 transitions that I think are helpful for a woman. So it's focused on women, but I feel very strongly I don't want to just fix the women. There's a lot
Yeah,
of
of course.
information in the book around unconscious biases that I hope organizations and allies take to heart as well. So that was the reason for the book, and what the focus of the book is.
Yes. So within your career and all that you've been through and experienced and, the knowledge and expertise that you've gained over the years, what would you say has been your biggest lessons and learnings within your career?
Um,
And I'm
that's a
sure
big
you have
question.
multiple, but maybe there's one or two that really stand out
Yeah,
for you.
Well, I think just because we're speaking so much about gender because of the book and the work I do, that I think the biggest learning for me in a career, I think when I started a career, I sort of thought of a career as going from point A to point
Point
B.
B, yeah.
But yeah, what I really realized, and that's why I used the climbing staircase as a metaphor for the book, is that, I think our careers, and especially as a woman, they don't go in a straight line,
No.
and they can meander, and we take time off and we take time in, and at different times in our lives, different things are important. And so I think for me, the biggest learning is that a career is long. There's lots of opportunity to do very meaningful work. I think I was reading some research now that says we're probably going to live to 103, our generation. And so
Yes.
we're going to work for a long time. So work is long, a career is long. And I think there are nodes and off ramps and there are different ways to take it up depending on what's happening in our lives. And so for me, the staircase is helpful because I think of that as my career feels like that. But my hope is that even if I revisit some parts of my career, if I come back to something I've done before, or I move back into an academic environment or be an entrepreneur, I've had opportunities to move into different places and roles, is that I hope I come back each time with a higher level of consciousness. So that's kind of how I think of it. I think my biggest learning is a career is long. It is going to take some spirals and twists and turns, but hopefully always in a way that I bring a higher consciousness to the work I do. So I suppose that's my learning over a career.
Yes. So I want to also just go back to leadership or talk about the lack of leadership from both an entrepreneurial and global perspective. So what do you believe needs to change the current narrative? And I know that's a very loaded question.
Well, no, I was going to say, can I ask you more about that? Because it seems like you have specific thoughts on sort of where leadership is lacking or the current narrative. Am I allowed to do that in a podcast or not?
I guess so. I mean, I just think that if you talk about global leadership from like a political standpoint or, any kind of top level leadership, I just think that there's such a lack of connection and really listening to people, from a leadership perspective. And I think people have become more power hungry and more about, how they can serve themselves and not serve other people. So I guess it's, that's my view on it. So
Yeah,
I don't know
thank
what
you.
yours is.
No, thank you. Thanks, Karen. When it comes to leadership, I think that is often the problem, as you're alluding to, is that we equate leadership with a position. So we go, oh, I want this powerful position, so then I'll become a leader. Or we equate leadership with being busy. Like if we're just being busy and productive and meeting requirements, we're being a leader. And so I think what to me is helpful is if we step back and we think about ourselves as leaders, or think about the leaders that we follow. We follow leaders who have a strong sense of who they are, what they stand for. They have a vision that is compelling to us, that we want to get behind, and they're able to articulate that. And so I agree in the sense that I think a lot of leaders, and my world is not so much political leadership, it's corporate leadership, is that we think if we just meet all the requirements, we're going to be successful leader, or if we're just highly productive or busy, we're a successful leader, where in many ways I feel all that is we're highly competent worker bees, for lack of a better word. We're just really competent worker bees. We're not bringing a new way of seeing ourselves or understanding who we are in the world. And so, I feel when I work with leaders, what I'm very aware of is that in my language, I would talk about that leadership development is really identity development. So to become a leader, you need to understand yourself as a leader. And as part of that understanding is the ability to be able to sense threats and opportunities in your environment, and then communicate really compelling visions that inspire people to follow you. And I think we don't spend enough time focusing on those aspects of leadership. I think just meeting requirements is leadership. And so I agree. I think if we think of leadership more as an identity issue than a role or a power issue, then I think we're in a different place.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that, what would you say some of your biggest career highlights have been? Is there anything particularly that stands out for you or that's memorable?
Well, I think, Karen, we share South Africa as our heritage.
Yes.
And so I think what I'm grateful for from my career. And it's funny, again, with highlights, I don't think of specific roles or jobs, but I think I'm very grateful that over a career, I've been able to work in different places. I think that's what I've loved about the
Yes,
highlights is that, I've worked in South Africa, I've worked in Europe, I've worked in America. So I've loved that my career has allowed me to live and work in different places,
yes,
and that my career has allowed me to kind of ramp up when I wanted to and ramp down when I wanted to focus more on my family. So I sort of appreciate that. I appreciate that I could kind of flex and change with what the demands were in my life. I'm grateful that it's allowed me to work and live in different continents. And I think I'm also grateful that my career, I think, and it has a lot to do with the content of the work I do. I've been able to work in for-profit environments, in academic environments, in not-for-profit environments, in entrepreneurial environments. So I'm very grateful just for the exposure of all those things. I get bored easily. And so I suppose I'm
yes.
grateful that there were those kinds of moving dimensions to a career. And for that, I'm very grateful.
Yes, for sure. So obviously you've touched on the South African aspect and obviously been born and raised in South Africa and now living in the US. So
Yeah.
do you believe having grown up in such a diverse country has influenced your path and has given you greater perspective in terms of your leadership and your career path?
Definitely. I think it's a big question. I think it's shaped a career in so many ways, is that I think growing up as a white South African, I think you were very aware that we needed to play a very specific role in redressing what had happened. And so
Yes,
I take challenging systems and status quo quite seriously in the work that I do. And I mean, mine is more focused on the women's space than on the race space, so there are lots of intersections of how women show up.
yes,
So I think South Africa definitely gave me that. I think the need to change and shape and challenge how systems operate. So I think it gave me that. But what I'm very grateful for in South Africa as well is, again, to have been white, to have grown up during apartheid, to be there when Nelson Mandela came into power, was also to be in workplaces. I think we really needed to learn to be comfortable with difficult conversations
yes,
and honest conversations in very meaningful ways. And I feel, given the work I've chosen to do in the women's leadership space, I'm so grateful for that, because I think often, I don't even know if it's American, but just maybe outside of South Africa, I think notions of how to talk about gender and to be direct and straightforward and helpful and constructive about it
yes,
is often, I think, can be intimidating to people, or it's the like elephants in the room proverbial if we don't talk about it. But what I appreciated so much, I think in South Africa, I feel still now, I mean, my family's there, is that nothing's off limits. Everything's on the table and everything should be discussed. And for that,
yes.
I'm so grateful. I think South Africa gave me so much in terms of a career, but I think that that's sort of top of mind in terms of our conversation at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as the world has gone through one of the most trying times in terms of the pandemic and has experienced massive change, as you also work with Fortune 500 companies, what are some of the biggest leadership challenges you personally see that these companies are facing? And how are you, through your leadership skills and tools, able to help these companies and individuals? And can you give us any examples?
Sure. Yeah, these are not small questions.
Yeah.
Karen, I think, for me, as I've alluded to earlier, I think the concern is the number of women who are opting out of workplaces in very specific ways. I think on the one hand, women are really rethinking ambition. I think they're not less ambitious, but I think pre-pandemic, women were prepared to do whatever it took to be successful. And I think women are not prepared to do that anymore. And so I think women, first of all, are already rethinking ambition and questioning how the companies they choose to work with treat them and show up. So I think that's a big challenge. I think the other challenge that I feel I work a lot with leaders on, and I'll talk more about how I do that, is really what I think some writers are terming the hidden resignation. And by
Mm,
hidden, I'm talking about sort of the great reevaluation and the great resignation. I think, yes, that's happened. I'm less so now with layoffs happening in this country at the moment. But I think what's happening is this sort of quiet quitting idea, or the hidden resignation. It's this idea that we're kind of opting out and not bringing our full selves to work and kind of dialing it in, for lack of a better word. So I think companies are really struggling to engage people in meaningful ways. And I think people are not engaged with the places they work. And, and a lot of research supports this, is that, sort of, I think something like 40% of people are thinking about leaving in the next 2 to 3 months. 60% of people are not engaged in their jobs. So we kind of show up, do the work, but we don't bring our creativity, our innovation, our engagement to the places we work. And so I think that to me is one of the biggest problems companies are dealing with. And so how I work with companies on that is, first of all, for leaders to understand that they make a difference. When you ask people why they're engaged, sort of 70% of the reason why people are engaged or not often has to do with their leadership behaviors. So the ways a direct supervisor or leader acts and behaves engages people or doesn't. So I think, first of all, it's to understand that as leaders, you have an unbelievably important role to play in making sure people feel included. And so I think, first of all, to really help people understand that, and how to be good at just straight up leadership skills. So, giving and receiving feedback, inclusive leadership. So I think those are important skills. And then on the other hand, I think where I find I'm doing a lot of work with companies is, we know that for people to really want to stay in organizations, what is very important to people is a sense of fairness and opportunity. All of us, regardless of what our demographics are, what our intersections are, we want to be treated fairly, and we want to feel that we have access and opportunity, equal opportunity and access to what's happening in workplaces. And so with companies, I spend a lot of time looking at, how do you debias your systems? What does your performance management look like? What do your hiring processes look like? How do people receive feedback? And are those processes fair? Because when people experience that, they're far more inclined to stay and feel embedded and belong and engaged and do good work. So, I think those are the main challenges I'm seeing, and how people choose to show up around that.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. So it is important for our audience to know that you also have a degree in industrial psychology. Do you believe that this has given you an edge in your leadership as well? Just understanding the psychology of, I guess, people as well.
I don't know if it's given me an edge. Like I feel I coach a lot of leaders, and I feel I learn often so much from them, more than I'm helping them, in a sense. In that I feel, I just feel different people come to leadership in different ways. Some people come through experience, some have kind of a gut instinct, some people have worked really hard to be effective leaders. So I don't think it gives me an edge. It just affirms my interest in leadership. So, if field is leadership, I'm deeply interested in the field. So it comes easy. Like, I want to read articles, and I want to try new things, and I want to advise, and I want to immerse. So I don't think it gives me an edge. It just provides a motivational wellspring. It's not exhausting to me, where I think leadership is hard, and it can be deeply depleting to people to lead. So I'm sort of grateful that my interest at least can sustain how I feel about leadership over time. If I didn't have that, I think most leaders get sort of worn down by the very roles they're doing. So I don't know, it gives me an edge. It sort of gives me the motivation and the interest, which I'm grateful for.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk about mental health, because obviously it's a very important subject, especially in our current times. So do you believe that leaders in all aspects of your work are offering enough support? And do you think that there needs to be more focus, resources, and attention to this? And what would be some of the techniques you apply in your teachings? And can you give us any examples?
Sure. I think in many ways, leaders were at the forefront of mental health issues in this country during the pandemic, in the sense that I think people were deeply isolated. A lot of the social services and mental health facilities and opportunities and services were just not readily available. And so I think leaders in one-on-one meetings and in dealing with talent over the last 3 years, I think we're at the forefront. And I think I almost feel sorry for them, because I feel many of us were not prepared for that. And, we were in people's homes and lives, watching their struggles, watching their strain, dealing with the emotions that were coming out. And we know if we look at the research, women leaders, particularly senior women leaders, took the mental health of their teams on themselves very seriously and may in many ways be struggling with burnout now because of that. So
Yes.
I feel leaders were at the forefront. They were watching what was happening. They were understanding how challenged many people were and were trying to be of support, but while trying to support themselves with all their challenges. And so I think leaders played a remarkable role in addressing mental health issues. I think they didn't always feel supported in doing that. And I feel many of them were remarkable. They sort of threw themselves into support. I think my concern now is what I see with many leaders, what they're challenged with at the moment is this idea of how do you balance that kind of compassion with containment? So compassion is really understanding, where the other is and what their challenges are and struggles, and how to be supportive. And I would couple that in corporate speak with empathy. It's like to truly understand where the other is. But I think leaders are challenged now that the world seems to be kind of ramping up and engaging again. How do you balance the sort of compassion and empathy with starting to drive to results again in a very different way? And so, I think it's challenging. And I know, personally, I have two grown sons, as you know, and I was so aware when they were growing up, how do you balance looking after one's mental health without creating kind of a learned helplessness that I will be the person who will come and help them? It's like letting them alone long enough to know that they are resilient in ways. And I suppose that's what I'm seeing with leaders now. I think during the pandemic, leaders jumped in and were fully present and really took the mental health of those who worked for them very seriously. I think they're now moving to a place of, how do I balance this understanding for what someone needs, but with the focus on driving and to be compassionate while moving towards results and not creating a type of learned helplessness. I think that's my worry with where a lot of mental health is going now, is that are we not allowing people to know that they are strong, that we are resilient, and you become resilient, I think, by coping through things in a supported fashion.
Yes.
And so I don't know, Karen, if that's probably the answer that you were expecting or hoping, but
I think it's good because it's a different
moment.
perspective. I mean, I hadn't thought of it like that either. I mean, obviously, like you say, it's also about driving results, but then, also having the compassion and empathy.
Yes.
It is a very good perspective, which I'm sure not necessarily everybody has thought about. So I wanted to talk about entrepreneurship, especially for women, because obviously there's amazing women with amazing ideas and concepts for business. But one of the biggest challenge women have is accessing funding in a multi-billion-dollar industry. So what do you believe the reason is for this? And is this something in your leadership guide you help women overcome? And can you give us any examples if you have any?
So no, Karen, I think you're right. I think more and more research is coming out how little funding women tend to receive when it comes to business concepts. And I think the big driving factor often is, a deep unconscious biases around, what a leader looks like. For so many of us, when we think of an entrepreneurial leader, many people still think male, and so when there's a woman standing there, we're not sure, will she be driven enough? Is she successful? So I fully agree. There's a lot of research on the unconscious biases at play. And I think sadly, the other issue are just straight up access to networks is that, a lot of the funders are very networked and the networks look pretty gendered. And so women often just don't have access to these networks that would give them access to the funding they need. So I think that's very real. And I think there's work to be done on making organizations and institutes just very aware of how they spend, who they're spending their money on and how they spend. And I think what's great, though, is we're starting to see some unicorns run by women. So I think that's changing the narrative as well.
Yes.
From a woman's perspective, I think, and I'm gonna stereotype a bit here and generalize a bit, but what we see that often the biggest variable for success as an entrepreneur is the ability to make mistakes and learn from them and move forward pretty quickly. That's what's going to make you a successful entrepreneur. And what we tend to see is that women can tend to be more perfectionistic, less likely to make mistakes. And if they do make mistakes, to ruminate too long on those mistakes and personalize the mistake and make it about their own deficiencies instead of learning from the mistake.
Yes.
So I suppose my advice to women entrepreneurs is, while the system is still as it is, how brave are you learning just to make mistakes, to like really learn to make mistakes? Don't see it as failure. Just go, to be a successful entrepreneur, I have to make mistakes. I have to learn from them. And I just need to kind of fail forward fast, is what we would talk about with our students. So that's what I would encourage women to do, is how do you understand that to be a successful entrepreneur, you absolutely need to make mistakes. So how do you make them? How do you make them fast? And how do you move on? Don't personalize, don't ruminate, and don't let your anxiety around being perfect stand in the way of you just stepping into something and making the mistake. So I think from an entrepreneurship perspective, I just think that would be important.
Yeah, absolutely. So that leads me to the final question, which is,
Oh.
what are the 3 key pieces of advice you would give to other entrepreneurs who are looking to pursue a similar career, or entrepreneurs in general? And what legacy would you like to leave?
Oh, wow. So entrepreneurs in general, not necessarily women entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I just think, any advice that you would impart to entrepreneurs, whether it's women, men, just across the board. But if you want to be specific, you can focus on women.
No, I think it's I don't know, I think entrepreneurship is lonely. So I think you want to find your tribe, you want to find your kindred spirits who you can reach out to, who will sustain you over time. I think this failure is important. It's just really, I think
Yes.
the research keeps coming back to it, is that the biggest difference between a successful and entrepreneur not was the one who was prepared to take the risk, learn from the mistake, and move forward, and not be cavalier, not be stupid, but learn.
Yeah.
So I think it's understanding that you are going to make mistakes. You're absolutely going to make mistakes, and how can you learn from them? And then one of my favorite quotes, and I think it's just because I'm now self-conscious on here, I can't think of who said it. It was the woman artist. Anyway, she basically talks about being terrified her whole life, but never letting it stop her from doing anything.
Yeah.
And I think as an entrepreneur, because you are pioneering normally in ways others are not, you are going to be terrified. So I suppose I would say, don't wait till you feel confident. It's not going to come. Be terrified, but do things anyway. So I suppose my focus would be on action.
Yes.
And then from a legacy perspective, I think legacy sounds very dramatic. So
Well, how would you like to be remembered?
Yeah, I think remembered would be better. Thank you. That's actually, it's interesting. I don't know why legacy feels weird, but remembered doesn't. So I think from being remembered is that I feel in almost all my conversations in different ways, whether personal or professional, I think I help people kind of reconnect with their passion and purpose. Like I think I help people reclaim that or reconnect with that. And so I suppose I would like to be thought of as someone who after people had conversations with me, they felt hopeful again. Like I want people to feel hope after having a conversation with me. I suppose that's what I would want to be remembered for. And I think I help connect to hope by going back to what is important. What are our passions? What are our purpose? What is our ambition? So I hope I help people connect to that. So I think that's what I would want to be remembered by.
Well, thank you so much, Leanne, for joining us today. So if people want to connect with you, what are the best platforms to do so?
I'm really bad at social media, so that's not reliable. So I would say go to my website, leannemeyer.com, and all my information is there, and they could email or choose other forms as well. I'm trying to up my social game, but otherwise I would just say my website.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much, and hopefully we can have you back in the future.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Karen. Thank you.